My friends, the game has changed irreversibly, and what you're about to hear takes a very strong stomach to face reality. What was once handled in the dark backrooms of Brasilia as a simple consular bureaucracy has exploded in the last few hours and turned into an unprecedented diplomatic incident in our recent history. The government of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has just crossed a red line from which no country returns without paying a very high price. They have declared open and direct diplomatic war on the United States. The US State Department, now under the tough and relentless administration of Donald Trump, did not back down. They have just issued an official statement with institutional weight that Brazilian diplomacy hasn't seen in decades. They publicly refuted Itamaraty before an international audience. The American government described the official justifications of the Brazilian government as a baseless lie. The Planalto Palace not only blocked the entry of high-ranking representatives from Washington, they orchestrated, fabricated, and spread an international public conspiracy to try to justify this veto to the world. What is happening now completely changes the balance of power on our continent, and I need you to visualize the macabre engineering behind this. But first, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and give the video a like, because it takes a lot of work to make this. Let's go. Brazil is being pushed by force and against the will of its people. And then you ask me, where to, Shimon Oliveira? Into a dark geopolitical room. Picture this scene clearly. The government locks the heavy steel doors of our country from the inside. They turn off all the lights, cut the connections that link us to the free Western world, to transparency, and to the market economy. And in the midst of this suffocating darkness, they start projecting false shadows on the walls. The purpose of these shadows is to terrify you and your family. It's to try to convince us that the real danger is out there in the free world, while we prepare to hand over the keys of the country to the tyrants of the axis of evil. And that's the exact image of our foreign policy today. They are keeping Brazil in the dark so that no one can see what they will do with the system. Let's get to the cold facts and the dates, because the truth lies in the details that the press hides. This whole machinery of disruption started turning last Friday. A high-level American delegation composed of Assistant Secretary Riley Barnes and Samuel Sampson, who is none other than the head of the U.S. Office of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, had an official and documented trip to Brazil between July 27th and 30th. The agenda of these two diplomats was transparent, routine, and official. They had scheduled meetings with members of the Brazilian federal administration itself, scheduled talks with religious leaders, and meetings with representatives of civil society. The focus of this mission? To assess electoral integrity, the preservation of religious freedom, and the state of freedom of expression in the country. But Brazil's foreign ministry, acting under direct orders from the hardcore of the government, stamped a resounding and scandalous denial on the diplomatic visas. They closed the border to human rights inspectors, and immediately, to try to cover up diplomatic clashes and international embarrassment, sources connected to the Planalto Palace planted a coordinated narrative in foreign newspapers, such as the Washington Post. The story they tried to sell was that the mission sent by Trump and coordinated by Secretary of State Marco Rubio had the dark objective of discrediting the electronic voting machines and sabotaging the October elections. This insults the intelligence of anyone who follows international politics. If an international observer travels thousands of kilometers to question the process and upon arrival finds a perfect, clean and auditable electoral system, what happens? He returns empty-handed and the system comes out stronger, validated before the world. The Brazilian Superior Electoral Court itself has a long and peaceful history of inviting diplomatic missions to learn about how the voting machines work. The registration of external observers has always followed a routine process. But the official government narrative falls apart the moment you apply logic. The plain truth is that the denial of these visas has absolutely nothing to do with voting technology. When the government blocks the entry of the United States Human Rights Division, what it is actually blocking is the global investigation into its own modus operandi. The government has a visceral fear that American diplomats with immunity and an international voice will officially report the silent religious persecution happening in the country. The brutal and relentless advance of judicial censorship against ordinary citizens and the legal siege against any voice of political opposition. American diplomacy was coming to Brazil to shine a light on our geopolitical darkness. And the Brazilian system, which operates in the shadows, went into absolute panic. Now pause and analyze the moment. Because the question is, why would the government pick a fight of this magnitude right now? Why challenge the largest partner in investment, technology, and trade of value-added goods in the Western Hemisphere? Because the government knows that the scenario for the month of October is a mathematically mapped-out catastrophe. They feel the ground collapsing beneath their own feet and rejection hitting the ceiling in all internal polls. When defeat becomes imminent and inevitable, a regime with authoritarian tendencies and friendships desperately needs to create an external scapegoat in advance. It's the classic manual written in Cuba and perfected in Caracas. They are preparing brick by brick the groundwork for a Venezuela-style scenario. If the result at the polls is the disaster they already foresee, the narrative is already planted in the press. The blame wasn't on voter rejection, but on an alleged international interference led by Donald Trump. Did you get the message? They're not defending the country's sovereignty. They're creating the perfect alibi to justify a state of exception. And here's where the danger lies. Then you get to the next layer of this story, where the mechanism reveals itself to be even more frightening. If you think the problem was just an isolated diplomatic crisis caused by incompetence, what goes on behind the scenes in the media will shock you. While the federal government slams the steel door in the face of the Free West, the legacy media, and pay attention. The consortium of major newspapers and television networks fires up its machinery at full blast to do the dirty work of public relations. Their mission, coordinated and simultaneous, is now to clean up the image of the worst and bloodiest dictatorships on the planet. Look at the absurd maneuver that Folha de São Paulo recently carried out. They published a prominent article with a headline talking about the miraculous transformation of North Korea's economy. North Korea? My friends, an article suggesting that Kim Jong-un's totalitarian regime is richer than ever. What Folha did was to rehash a narrative that had circulated almost 2 months earlier in foreign outlets, which often receive propaganda material paid for by closed regimes. Now, what they don't tell you is that Kim Jong-un just executed some of his highest-ranking army members for diverting tons of emergency supplies. Nor that Kim Jong-un has just sent 30,000 North Korean citizens to the front lines in Russia's war against Ukraine. They won't tell you that, but I will. But in Brazil, the media decided to import this narrative for free, precisely at the moment when Lula's government declares war on Washington. And it desperately needs to convince the population that the dictators from the East are actually models of success. It's mental programming carried out on the masses day after day. Get used to the dictatorship because it's the future of the country. What Folha de São Paulo has the courage to call an economic miracle is, in the cold light of reality, an international bloodbath. North Korea didn't get rich because it discovered a new technology, because it innovated in industry, or because it opened its market. The country turned into a gigantic military smuggling hub, selling artillery shells, howitzer ammunition, and missiles to Russia to feed the war machine in the war in Ukraine. What they also don't mention is that half of the North Korean population is starving. Kim Jong-un is profiting off the dead in a war, while the regime's coffers grow fat with war money. The regime's coffers, not the people's. The North Korean people remain mired in chronic hunger. They have no access to the internet, live in a state of absolute slavery, subjected to brainwashing from birth and the constant threat of summary executions for any sign of independent thought. They can't even cut their hair differently from the leader. Is it punishable by death? Now look at the impact of all this on the life of Brazilians. Brazilian mainstream journalism is looking at the dirty profit generated by the death industry and the enslavement of an entire nation and calling it a miraculous transformation. They deliberately omit, for example, how the regime used the pandemic not to save lives but to tighten its deadly grip on its own population. And the psychological operation coordinated with those in power doesn't stop with print newspapers. Rede Globo, through Fantástico during Sunday prime time, dedicated almost 20 minutes to hammering home the idea that the Chinese communist dictatorship is the peaceful alternative and the perfect alternative to what they label as the United States monopoly. And it's not just Globo either. Several podcast channels, including the biggest ones in Brazil, spread this idea 24 hours a day. The other day I saw a random podcast host saying, "What I saw in China is what I would like to have in Brazil." They normalize this idea day and night. It's a coordinated attempt to rewrite reality. And this is something very serious that few people really understand or can grasp the magnitude of. China is indeed the biggest buyer of our exports in terms of volume. But what do they buy? Raw materials, commodities. They take our soybeans or our iron ore. They don't invest in our industry. They don't buy our high-tech products and don't create high-value-added jobs in our country. Quite the opposite. They are whipping Brazilian workers in Bahia and Minas Gerais. On the other hand, the United States buys our airplanes, our machines and our finished goods. Besides orange juice, coffee, meat, among many thousands of items, there are more than 2,000 items that the United States imports from Brazil. American capital is responsible for the foreign direct investment that supports entire production chains in Brazil. Trading the American partnership for submission to China and North Korea is not a shrewd commercial strategy. It's deliberate economic suicide wrapped in ideological rhetoric. The planned transition happening before our eyes is brutal. The media is carrying out a continuous psychological campaign, a systematic brainwashing campaign to normalize dictatorship in the mind of the average Brazilian citizen. The subliminal message that shows up every day in headlines and TV newscasts is the following: distancing oneself from American democracy, from market freedom, and from individual rights to embrace authoritarian, censoring, and cruel regimes in Asia is the safest and most modern path for Brazil. They are locking you in the geopolitical darkroom and saying that outside, where there is light, private property, and freedom of speech, the air is poisonous. The absolute desperation of Lula's government, which motivates all this insane theater of visa refusals and fabricated quarrels, has a very clear origin. Donald Trump didn't just return to the White House to adjust trade tariffs or review climate agreements. The American government, based on strategic intelligence, has launched a relentless international hunt against the financial and operational arteries of the global radical left. The Trump administration and its strategic allies began to expose the dirty inner workings of the Latin American left. They are mapping and revealing the obscure financing routes, the structural connection of South American populist leaders with globalist agendas, and above all, the dark and dangerous alliance that these governments have been forming with Islamic radicalism, especially with the terrorist regime of Iran. The United States has decided to take the hemisphere back. They are dismantling piece by piece the subversion machine that operated freely in Latin America for years. The Planalto Palace felt the blow. They realized with terrifying clarity that the shield of international impunity that protected them simply cracked. The era of condescension is over, so the survival order issued to the core of the government was brutal and suicidal. Cut ties with the free Western world at any cost. It is preferable to sink the country's economy and diplomatically isolate Brazil than to allow the international community to investigate the attacks on democracy that are being committed here. The fate of Brazil is being tied to the axis of evil out of pure instinct for self-preservation by a political group that knows its time is running out. We've reached the crucial point of our analysis, the moment when reality reveals itself without disguise. Now I want you to type these 2 keywords in the comments to show that you've decoded the system, that you understand exactly what mechanism is crushing our country. What the government is carrying out is a policy of selective sovereignty to hide its planned collapse. I'll repeat it so it's on record. Selective sovereignty and planned collapse. Type these two slogans in the comments now so the algorithm will take our message to thousands of Brazilians who need to wake up. Their sovereignty is purely for show. They raise the flag of national pride, beat their chests, and shout interference only when they need to block the entry of human rights inspectors, American diplomats, and observers from free nations. But that same sovereignty magically evaporates when it comes to handing over our energy sources, our strategic ports, our critical infrastructure, and our data to the control of Chinese state-owned companies. They do not defend Brazil. They defend the exclusive right to oppress Brazilians without the free world watching. And the collapse is planned because they know that diplomatic isolation and breaking ties with the world's largest economy will bring severe consequences. Brazil will lose investments, the dollar will skyrocket, and the industry will come to a halt. And the inevitable result of this is the exponential increase in poverty in our country. And for regimes with a populist and authoritarian foundation, widespread poverty is not a management failure, it's a successful project. A people dependent on the state, impoverished and isolated from the world, has no strength to question those who govern them. We are witnessing in real time the greatest attempt at forced isolation of our country. They want to turn Brazil into a continental island, a submissive satellite of distant dictatorships. And breaking this psychological and institutional agreement requires much more than just watching the news. It requires that our voice breaks through the barriers of silence. And that's exactly why I need to make a direct and urgent appeal to those of you who understand the seriousness of what we're uncovering here. We can't just be spectators to the dismantling of our country. Right now, I'm running for the iBest award in the political influencer category. But pay attention. Being in this competition isn't about ego or a personal trophy. It's the greatest demonstration of strength from our community. It's proof that our analytical elite who don't swallow the brainwashing from the mainstream media carry weight, have a voice, and have the power to mobilize. We need to show the system that we haven't been and won't be silenced by artificial narratives. I'm counting on your support now. The official voting link is in the description of this video and also in the first pinned comment. Go there now and confirm your position. Prove that the intellectual resistance in Brazil is a force they can't control. So, hurry up now and cast your vote. We went from the 44th position and today we are in first place to qualify for the top 20 political influencers ranking in Brazil. So vote because this Tuesday we will move on to the next stage. Now, if the United States under Donald Trump has formally declared without mincing words that the accusation by Lula's government is a farce, a poorly rehearsed play, what will be the next move on the board? What will be the real and relentless retaliation from Marco Rubio and the White House starting this August? When the covert sanctions begin, when American tariffs build walls against our products and the only doors left open are those of Beijing, Pyongyang and Tehran, how will the Brazilian economy survive? This dark geopolitical room has no bottom. The economic and diplomatic abyss being carved in Brasilia is a one-way project, my friends. If they manage to complete the cycle, there will be no election or institution capable of reversing the damage. History is moving quickly and the gears don't wait for those who refuse to see the facts. So run, talk to your representative, your senator, the candidate who will ask for your vote. It's time for us to change the direction of Brazil because the system isolates those who don't know how to communicate. And on the market's chessboard, the logic is exactly the same. Today, the most valuable currency is people's attention. And for the entrepreneur, what hurts the most is being the best at what you do, but still remaining invisible. You have a great business, great knowledge, but nobody knows you exist. That's why I'm recruiting entrepreneurs or professionals who are the best at what they do, but feel invisible. They're trapped inside a bubble. Have you noticed how hard it is for people to pay attention to serious content? It seems like only dance videos go viral. I used to think that way, but after generating 50 million views per month on my social media, I realized that authority requires a method. You want to be recognized, break through the bubble, and get monetized in dollars, but no. Have you noticed that the game now is all about media? Look at the cases of Chimed and Havan stores. They tripled their sales when they realized they also needed to be a media company. The reality is that your identity cannot be outsourced. The owner needs to put himself out there. The time of recording with your phone without authority is over. I'm sure you understand all of this, you just don't know how to put it into practice. So on August 16th, I will host this immersive workshop 100% in person, face-to-face with me at my studio in Curitiba. It will be a practical meeting where I will personally guide and direct you in building your authority so your business can present itself professionally using a highly effective method. Well, the QR code is on the screen. The link is in the description and in the first pinned comment. But I need to be blunt about the numbers. There are only 5 seats left. When the last one is filled, the doors close. And then, my friend, I don't know when we'll have a new opportunity. Click the button now and secure your spot immediately. Come and bulletproof your communication. And I have 2 fantastic series to recommend so you can understand this whole world we're living in. It's amazing. It's there on our channel with tips on series and movies so you don't waste any more time. Take the advice, choose the title, and enjoy it with your family without woke culture, without whining. The link is in the description, in the pinned comment, and in the card that will appear in this video. You can also become a member of this channel and get early access to content. Subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and leave a like because it takes a lot of work to make these. Now shield your mind. I'm Shimon Oliveira and I'll see you in the next video. See you there.